Here we go. Great. Welcome everyone to Senate Education 1259 on Friday, March 3rd. Secretary French, great to see you. And right above you, in the square above you, we see the leader of school construction, Senator Gulick. So we're looking at the two of you, and we are talking about the school construction bill, which we have another copy of in our packets. And let me just pull mine out. There we go. Secretary French, would you mind weighing in on the bill? And then we're going to hear also from Ashlyn Doyen, who's with the Treasurer's Office.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dan French, Secretary of Education. I'm glad to hear the committee has appointed a leader of school construction. That's a positive first step.
It is a positive first step.
Yeah, and I appreciate the effort on the bill. Certainly support school construction and addressing those needs. I'd qualify my comments as being constructive and suggestions, if you will. The first one is just wanted to make the committee aware, if you're not already, that under Act 72, the General Assembly charged the agency with doing a school construction funding study. The agency has contracted that work out, and the report from that study should be back, I think, October. So that work is in flight. When I heard of Treasurer Pieciak's interest in this topic earlier in the General Assembly's deliberations this year, I reached out and met with him, and we discussed school construction funding, and I apprised him of the broader work under Act 72 and gave him an update on various elements under that law, including our study that's in process. So I just put that out there. I'm not saying this initiative would be redundant, but I just wanted to make you aware that there is a piece of work already in flight around that. And that leads me to my second comment. And this comment is somewhat stylistic, but I think also directly to this point that the agency already has work in flight. I would prefer not to be a co-chair of a committee, period. But in this case, since we already have work in flight, I would recommend that the Secretary of Education or designee be a member of the committee and have the treasurer be the sole chair of the committee. I'm not a fan of co-chairs of committees stylistically, but I think in this case, since we already have a substantive piece of work in flight, I'm not sure how I could represent that equally as a co-chair of a committee that's doing its own analysis, essentially. So I would prefer to serve as an active member of that, but not be the co-chair per se. Other than that, I support the idea and concept.
And we did ask Pledge Council, because one of the things we were concerned about early on, and I'm glad you're in agreement with our Pledge Council, that it's not duplicative. You know, this is new. This is different than what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think the difference here is the first part of it, where it's actually looking at the inventory and the assessment, which were two key components of Act 72. So this committee is not just charged at looking at the school construction funding. It's essentially starting to parse through the whole of the policy, you know, looking at the inventory, the assessment, basically what are the needs, looking then at what would be an appropriate funding model and a governance structure for that funding model. So to me, that makes sense from a logic standpoint. It's not necessarily duplicative, but I did want to elevate the fact that we are going to have a major, the agency and the Secretary of Education will have a major element of this work coming forward in the form of a study of school construction funding that was required under Act 72. So that would be put on the table, I'm sure, as part of this analysis. And again, that would lead me to conclude the Secretary of Education probably shouldn't be the co-chair. But
yeah. Senator Gulick, do you see any concerns with anything? Any recommendation? Any comments from Senator French?
No, I thank him for his comments, and I think this bill works really well in concert with the work that's already going on. I think the two together will be stronger.
Great. Committee. Any questions for Secretary French? Okay. Secretary French, if you can, just stick around while Ms. Doyen weighs in. And I know we're going to hear from you on other things.
Actually, Chair, could I ask one quick question of the Secretary? Secretary, Mr. French, Did the treasurer agree to be the lone chair of the committee? I haven't mentioned that.
Yeah, I don't think we got that far in our conversations, but certainly a very capable leader, and I'm sure he would not feel intimidated by that August assignment.
And we have with us the Director of Policy for the Office of Treasurer right here, who might be able to help us with that.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Duan, and as the chair said, I'm the Director of Policy in the State Treasurer's Office. I don't want to necessarily volunteer the treasurer to be the sole chair of this task force without asking him.
Sure.
But I do know that he is comfortable taking the leadership role in the task force, which is why he did volunteer to be a co-chair. And you know, the perspective of the treasurer's office is vital to this work, given the amount of funds and our financing that's involved. I can check with him and get back to you very shortly. I will even text him right now.
Right.
And then by the end of this, maybe we'll have an official response on that.
That would be great. And then if we can get an official response, and we'll have our ledge council, we may be able to vote this before 3 o'clock. That would be great. If you would let Ms. Wasserman know that we have just a couple of little edits. Ms. Joanne, anything else related to that? Anything else on the topic?
Nothing else related to the sole chair of the
Okay.
topic. We do have, if you're ready for me, we do have one substantive comment, and that is with respect to the appropriation at the end for $200,000. So the bill currently says that $200,000 is appropriated to the state treasurer to hire a school construction expert, which we do foresee that we will need the expertise of someone in that field. That it was our intention that the appropriation would also help us pay for additional costs that our office will incur from bond counsel and our financial advisor, as well as perhaps the hiring of a temporary employee to help staff this committee, especially if we are the sole chair. And so I think that the amount listed is enough to cover all of those things, but some flexibility in the language would be helpful and necessary in order for us to pay for those third-party services that we need.
Yeah, I think we began to run around that topic a day or two ago. Please, to the chair. No, I think it's completely appropriate, especially if you're already theoretically containing yourself within that amount. Seems appropriate.
So Secretary French, do you have an idea what your study's going to cost?
Yeah, I don't have the number. Our study's underway. We have a signed contract with a vendor. I could have our staff produce that amount. It's like many of the activities under Act 72, they were funded by the ESSER recovery dollars. So this is a discrete recovery activity that we're able to, again, leverage our state recovery dollars to accomplish goals that have been longstanding in this area. But we have a contract with a vendor, and I could provide that number.
And Senator Williams, I can get you a copy of Act 72, just so you have it. Okay,
I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, the scope of that is a little different. Again, it's just not duplicative work necessarily. Our study is really focused on school construction finance mechanism. So the contractor is out reviewing what other states do and analyzing that in terms of what would be a good fit for Vermont. So it's not really focused on the analysis, if you will, of the inventory and assessment work product that's specified in this bill.
anything else?
We don't have any other comments on the bill at this point. And I will listen to the rest of the conversation. If I get an answer from the treasurer on this sole chair, I'll raise my hand and let you know.
Great.
Do you have any other questions for me?
Looking up, nope, I don't think we have any other questions for you, and we will wait, and then hopefully we'll be able to make edits and vote before 3 o'clock.
Sounds good.
Okay. Mr. Secretary, while we have you, if senators would pull out their bill on school safety. I don't know if we have a new one. Okay, everyone. So this would be draft 5.1. After 5.1, 6.1.
Yeah, I apologize not for being able to participate yesterday, but Dee and my staff kept me apprised of your deliberations.
Yeah, and no problem at all. And we apologize for having these 6.1. So I'm looking for 6.1. I'm printing up a couple of copies. Apologize. Just, anyone else need a copy? 6.1. Okay. Okay. 2.1. Yeah. So I also had a conversation with Dee about this, and I don't know if Ledge Council is with us or not remotely. She's not. She's going to try at 1:30. She's going to join us at 1:30 to talk about edits. Dee made a couple of edits yesterday about adding fire drills. She also talked with me a little bit, and if you don't mind, Mr. Secretary, I'm just going to raise this right now since it was brought up in committee. Adding bias training to the group itself. And her question to me was, do teachers already have this, and does law enforcement already have this? And or is this would this be new? And I don't know if that's something you can answer. If I could, we could get an answer on.
Yeah, I think it's definitely known in the field of education. I mean, it's out there in terms of professional development. To my knowledge, it's not necessarily a requirement. I think it would be my recommendation to maintain the sort of coherence, if you will, of the school safety initiative. I think the issue of bias training might fall in better into the domain of the new revisions to the education quality standards that the state board is working on relative to the recommendations of the Act One Ethnic Studies advisory group. And we are certainly moving forward with our district quality standards and new quality assurance process. So that might be the better framing in terms of requirements around professional development, because I think the issue of anti-bias or just the broader appreciation for diversity and ethnic diversity in particular would probably be better represented in the requirement around needs-based professional development, which is embedded in the EQS and the new district quality standards.
So I'm just thinking, Senator Gulick raised it. I think it's a good point. So I'm just wondering though, would we then have, is it possible to have people on this committee that wouldn't have that bias training?
Yeah, possibly, for sure. And I don't know, again, my preference would be to move forward as it is without adding to that conceptualization. One of the challenges we face often in education, particularly I think in Vermont education, is we often change the names of things or embellish things, which is useful and to a certain extent. But what it happens, particularly in the case of behavior threat management assessment, which is a national body of work, has really discrete professional development science behind it. If we turn it into something different in Vermont or put different requirements on that, it either might slow down its uptake and implementation or make it more difficult for us to partner with other states or national entities are providing the training. So again, I support certainly the idea of anti-bias professional development. I don't see it as an essential necessary function to implement behavior threat management or assessment. But I think to the extent that the committee is interested in advancing that concept as a broader professional development requirement, I would suggest that could be done through the education quality standards and the related quality assurance process.
Senator Gulick, I know you might have to jump off in a minute for just a second.
Yeah, thank you, Senator French, Secretary French.
I'll take it as a compliment.
He does live in my district. You ready?
I guess I a little bit of pushback in that I think the bias training is very relevant to the work of the management piece, only because as it's been brought to our attention, it'll often be marginalized students who are the ones who are being, identified as potential risks, whether it be because they have a developmental disability or they are from, again, a marginalized group that often gets targeted for behaviors, perhaps to a higher degree than other cohorts of folks might be. But it seemed like actually it could be very relevant. And I know that there are bias trainings that exist. You can get them online, and you can obviously do extremely extensive bias training that goes on for months and months, that meet regularly, but you could also do shorter online trainings that can be very impactful. And it seems as though, since they're already doing training, this could be something that could be added to or in partner with the other training that they're doing around the risk management, the threat management, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know who made that contention around the people being identified for behavior threat as being, I don't think we have data that shows patterns of those students being more likely represented by different groups or what have you. I think it cuts across a wide variety of demographic categories. But I think, the other thing I would just highlight as a reaction to that, I know earlier on in deliberations, there are folks who are not supportive of behavior threat assessment. And I appreciate that. But I think it's also important, and I believe you heard from Dr. Randazzo at one point, that behavior threat assessment is not a punitive function. It's actually a support function. So to the extent it would identify students in need, the essential function of behavior threat assessment is to bring additional resources to bear. It's not punitive or disciplinary related. So I wouldn't want to conflate those two issues. So to the extent that anti-bias training would be necessary essentially to carry out behavior threat assessment, I don't agree with that. Would it be useful? Oh, certainly. Anti-bias perspective is useful across a wide range of organizational functions, but particularly since this is a non-punitive one, I especially don't make the connection between that being an essential ingredient, because essentially behavior threat assessment disposition is to find out what additional support students need, not necessarily to refer them to discipline or law enforcement.
Yes, Senator Gillis.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we did hear testimony that the goal of the threat assessment team certainly is not to be punitive. We absolutely heard that, but we also heard that sometimes the consequence is punitive, and it seems as though it morphs over time to a model that is more punitive in nature, even though that may not have been its, desired ultimate consequence. That is what's happening. At least that's what we've heard. We don't have any data. Maybe we should be looking to get some, but to everything that I heard in the testimony made sense to me as someone who worked in education for a long time. Sometimes, your best intentions don't go as planned.
Sure.
So putting that out there.
I would say in terms of the data, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the essential rationales for making this a requirement, is so that we would collect data on it, because right now it's voluntary, so it's virtually impossible to collect data. But again, the behavior threat assessment team it doesn't have any legal authority to impose punitive, actions on a student. That's still done through due process requirements that are well established in law, that ultimately include a school board and so forth. So educators, licensed educators who are empowered to do suspension and what have you, are required by law to review the educational context of the student's behavior, which includes the bias, the construct of any kind of disability through that assessment relative to their disability. So those, again, I would just separate the two processes out, yes, there might be some connection. Particularly, you can imagine small schools, the same people doing a lot of these things, but the due process standards are well prescribed in law. And I would encourage us again to think more broadly about that concern. I wouldn't necessarily pin it on behavior threat assessment. I would give this a chance to go as it is, and then as we collect data, if those patterns emerge, I certainly would be interested in exploring how to make it better. But again, one of the themes here is to stay consistent with what is a national sort of established best practice, and really to move forward with a sense of urgency, particularly on this particular strategy, because the other strategies we've described in this legislative initiative, like physical security and the planning and so forth, are preventative to a certain extent, but it's really the behavior threat assessment strategy that gives us the most promise of getting out in front of some of these issues and providing supports to students before actions are taken.
Senator Gulick did need to step off, but we can have that policy discussion. And there might be another way to do it. Maybe the people that are chosen already have bias training, but again, we don't want to limit people who might want to participate or should participate. Anything else? Any other suggestions at this point, Mr. Secretary?
No, I mean, I'd be happy to look at specific language around that area. I don't know if
Okay.
I've seen the specific language, because I'd have questions like which training, who's providing it.
Yeah.
In my experience, sometimes when these trainings are promoted, they're also coincidentally being, solely assigned to a specific provider. So I'd want that training defined a little bit better, but I'd be happy to comment further if I saw specific language.
Okay, I appreciate that. And maybe that's something Senator Gulick would be willing to take on during town meeting. And we did get, committee I believe Hayden reported a letter from Gun Sense Vermont to the committee, also to just supporting this work, this idea, this concept around school safety, and particularly as it relates to behavior threat assessments. I believe they may have outlined in the letter, it could have been a different letter, that we are an outlier. Is that accurate on this issue? In other words, we're one of the states that don't require. Is that true?
I can't say I've done an exact inventory of that. I was on a national call several weeks ago with about 20 of my peers from around the country, and we had a focused call on school safety issues and policy in particular. I don't see us as an outlier necessarily. I think
might not have been accurate. There might have been a website, Secretary French. It might be the Anytown USA website or something that talks about different rankings, different states are doing different things, and it doesn't mean I'm not criticizing in any way. It sounds like a lot of our schools are doing this, but the fact that we're now making it permanent, collecting data sounds like it's the right step for a lot of.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, that's certainly our diagnosis, and that's based on a very successful pattern of professional development support over 10, 15 years with the Vermont School Safety Center. But there's broad agreement that I think, as you've heard probably in testimony, that we should be moving towards requirements in this area. It's hard for me as a former superintendent of what we call a multi-district supervisory unit, where I had multiple schools. It's hard for me to understand as a superintendent how I could be comfortable with some of my schools being more safe than others. So I think it's only moving towards a requirement that we start to address that. And really, again, it helps us focus our professional development. But I think there is, back to my comment on the national conversation, there's broad consensus, I think, that behavior threat assessment is an area where a lot of states should be making progress, and there are other states who are farther along. But I think we've been staying apace of what has emerged as a national best practice. Dr. Rendoza was directly involved in on the seminal work with the U.S. Department of Education, the Secret Service, to sort of set the groundwork for this work. So I know we've stayed apprised of that and moved forward as that work has become more dominant in the field. So I think, again, our conclusion is it should move to a requirement. And, again, just really thank the committee for engaging on this topic. I think it's an important one.
Thank you. anything else for Secretary French? Ms. St. James, you're with us?
I
Just
am.
while we have Secretary French, were you able to watch yesterday's testimony and the edits that we asked for?
Are you asking? If it's edits, you must be speaking to me. That's St.
Yes,
James
we are.
Office of Legislative Counsel. No, I have not.
Okay, so we will go through those suggestions with you momentarily. In the meantime, Secretary French, are you leaving us now? I know Ms. Simmons is later. We'd love to have you stick around, but I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to say before leaving.
No, again, apologies for not being in yesterday. I believe Hayden has rescheduled my testimony on the independent school issue. That was the one piece that was on the agenda for yesterday. That's been scheduled for later in March. So I look forward to providing that testimony. Our team will be providing some testimony on the miscellaneous education bill to you this afternoon, but I'll be in other meetings. So
Thank you very much.
all right, thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Too. So Ms. St. James, what we reviewed yesterday, largely the edits, and you might, if you have time, watch the testimony to make sure I'm not missing anything, but we did agree to add fire drills on page 2. If you look at line 3, options-based response drills and fire drills, and then
Okay.
that's a similar situation on line 18.
Okay.
And I don't believe we had any other edits at this time. There is a policy decision that needs to be made around whether or not we are going to do a bias training for this team of people. Another way to do it would be make sure that the people that are on it have already had bias training. It's maybe 6, 1/2 dozen of the other, but the part that Secretary French seemed to infer was that if it's part of the overall training, we're then not consistent with some of the other with the national policy around how behavioral threat assessment is taught and how we educate those on there. So I don't know if the committee wants to weigh in on this in any way right now.
Well, I think having the bias training is fine. To Senator Keelet's points earlier, I see a lot in judiciary issues where you develop the policy and there's the intention in the committee or the General Assembly, but then in practice things become a little bit different. So yeah, I'm sure there's no intent for it to be punitive, but how it actually gets carried out on the ground over time can change, and I think having that training can't hurt.
Kind of seems okay if we were to do something like that.
I would just leave it that it's necessary training. It's relevant to the team, but the delivery, whether they're qualified before they are assigned to the team or it's part of their training pipeline. Either way,
Okay.
I think if they already have the training, awesome. I don't think they need to do it again.
So Ms. St. James, I'm going to leave it to Senator Gulick to work with you and Secretary French during town meeting week to come up with some language that this committee will add to the bill upon our return. But just know that we would need a placeholder for some language around bias training.
Great. Are you thinking that I would communicate that to Senator Gulick, or should I wait for Senator Gulick to wait? Okay.
I will communicate it with Senator Gulick and she'll be in contact with you.
Okay, thank you.
It would though be helpful, if you don't mind, making those 2 little changes and just sending us another clean copy. So that we
Sure.
can, that would be great. And that way we can post it and see if we may have missed something from yesterday. Those are the only notes that I have. Okay. Tell me a little bit about, Gulick, see ya. See ya, buddy.
I'm sorry, I'm not on your agenda at all today,
Yeah.
so I don't know when you want me or don't want me, but I can lurk on
That's
Zoom.
that's what we were gonna actually ask you. So tell us about your availability to join us.
Oh, I'm available. I would prefer to be remote if that's possible,
Absolutely.
but I can lurk on Zoom all afternoon.
Great. If you would lurk on Zoom often, that would be great. Then we can pull you into a couple of these discussions. And the only big pressing drafting request is going to be, we've asked Becky Wasserman to clean up and make some final edits to school construction that we hope to vote by 3. And have you heard back from Ms. Wasserman? She should be here in 2 minutes. Okay, great. Okay. While we wait for Ms. Wasserman, Ted Fisher, why don't you join us to the table to talk about driver's ed, which is in a section of the miscellaneous education bill. Those watching and those who aren't, we did put a section 7 into miscellaneous education bill. And in short, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fisher, this is to create a model program.
Correct. For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education, the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs, and I'm glad to return on the same topic as I appeared earlier this week. So yes, the intent of the language, and I apologize, I have not managed to pull up your most recent draft here, so I'm just going to do that while I talk to you. I apologize for that. The request was for us to create a model pilot program.
You know, I'm going to do something that I loathe to do, Mr. Fisher, but do you mind switching out? Only because we have Ms. Wasserman here, and you can take the time
Not
to add
mine,
that.
and I want to just glance at one of the items
Great,
here.
thank you. Ms. Wasserman, please. We have just a couple of edits to the school construction bill. And if we are still on draft 1.1. And the recommendation, we've not heard back officially, but I think it's going to end up being fine or can take fix in another committee. This state treasurer or designate will serve as the chair. There will be no co-chairs, and the Secretary of Education will serve as a member. Designee or designate? I mean, it's written out E, but I always think of it as a French word, and it's just missing the.
Say designate.
For the important part, big questions.
Right.
Okay, so we're waiting on the money, and then the other changes of the treasurer would serve as chair.
Treasurer will serve as chair, and then that makes the Secretary of Education a member. Then, page 5, line 1, what the treasurer wants to make certain is that there's flexibility to hire an expert as well as support the other efforts in the office. I'm not sure the actual language there, but they're not going to use, their message is they're not going to use $200,000 for this. They may use 100 for the expert and then 75 for the other office sort of supports, etc. So I'm not sure what we want to put in there, but that's the goal.
So I can keep it as to hire a school construction expert as described in subdivision D2 and to assist and any other assistance for the task force, something to that effect.
I'd like a little snap here. I'm just trying to think. A
Um,
little, any kind of,
I could just make it general, just, the amount is appropriated for, assistance to the task force.
no, they'd like to have the expert listed there, the expert as well as financial support for the treasurer's office. The work the treasurer's office may do, yeah, support of the task force.
Hire So it's more financial, technical assistance.
They just want to, they want more broad, assist, like, for whether they have to hire another part-time person, whether they need to buy copy paper, thank you.
So it's not just for a consultant.
No, it's not, this $200,000 is going to pay the consultant, the expert, as well as other needs that might come up.
So on page 3 of the bill.
Yeah.
Under assistance, subdivision 1 says the task force has administrative, technical, and legal assistance of AOE in the Office of the State Treasurer.
So could you say then that $200,000 administrative, technical, and legal assistance?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I could just say it's for assistance as provided in subsection B, so that it covers both the administrative, technical, and legal assistance referred to in subdivision 1, as well as the contracting for the expert in subdivision 2.
But the money is not going to the agency of education,
No, it's
just to
going
the treasurer.
to the
So
treasurer.
does that saying, referencing line 16 on page 3, does that use things only because AOE is in there?
I mean, it's going to the treasurer for that assistance. I suppose the treasurer, if AOE asked the treasurer for some of that, those funds, they could, transfer it to them for the support of the task. It's for the general support of the task force, so I think that they would be able to do that. But you could also, I think the only other way to do it would be to appropriate an amount specifically to AOE and an amount specifically to the treasurer if you wanted to really.
Right, but that's not the goal. The goal is just to give the money to the treasurer's office. Yeah. Senator Hashim.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what is the issue with the language as it's currently written?
So unless I'm misunderstanding what they said, is that they want to make sure that $200,000 can be used for more than just an expert. They want to make sure that $200,000, they may only need $50,000 for an expert, but they might need other supports.
Right. Okay.
And that's where I just wonder if it makes sense to just say construction expert, as well as support administrative, technical, and legal assistance, period, something like that in that last section. Is that
Chair,
okay?
Chair.
No, yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I was just agreeing with you that I think we should just keep it fairly general for the treasurer's office to use as they need.
Yeah.
So I currently have the sum of 200,000 is appropriated to the Office of the State Treasurer from the general fund in fiscal year 2024 to hire a school construction expert as described in subdivision B2 of this section, and for any administrative, technical, and legal assistance for the task force.
That's it.
Sound better? Sound okay? And who is our point person in the treasury right now? What's her name? Yeah, was she around? I didn't know if she was maybe on the internet or. All right, we'll just, that feels good to you, Senator Gulick? Great. Okay, so what we'll ask you to do, if you don't mind, is bring us back a clean draft, and we'll take a vote by 3 o'clock.
I can email this to Hayden right now.
Okay, we just need the, yeah, and then he could share it with the treasurer's office.
Sure.
Okay,
So 3 o'clock.
if not before.
Okay, I've scheduled another committee at 2, but I can.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just do that now.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, okay. Mr. Fisher. So back to driver's education.
So again, for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. As this is the week before town meeting break, and we're a couple weeks out of crossover, you are very busy, and as are we. So I just want to note up front that the testimony you will receive from my colleague, General Counsel Simmons, has a section on this, which has one of the agency's concerns. That was based originally off a previous draft, and we can just chalk that up to my oversight. Looking at the most recent draft, I want to speak to the additional language you've added in draft 4.1 in a moment. But if, with the chair's permission, I'd like to focus on the transportation item first, transportation fund item first, because overall, both the Agency of Education and the Department of Motor Vehicles, speaking on behalf of my AOT colleagues as well, really appreciate the committee taking this up and working on this program, and we really appreciate you committing resources to it.
Right, and just to be clear, we're only asking you to talk about section 7 right now.
Yes,
We know it-
yes, that's what I'm speaking.
Yes.
But I'm looking at draft 4.1, just to be clear.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to scroll down to section C for the moment here of that section. So we did ask for $200,000, and then we asked for it to come from the education fund. The reason we did so is because we believe that it is appropriately education spending. And when we do statewide things that either replace or complement local education spending, there's a common practice of having that sometimes be appropriated in the education fund. After consultation with my AOT colleagues and with with the governor's office, the administration does not support using transportation fund dollars for the funding because this will be education spending. The ed fund is the appropriate place for it. And our colleagues from AOT also asked us to emphasize that the vast majority of transportation funds are used to leverage federal transportation funding, and that they believe that is an additional reason why it's not an appropriate source.
So just while we have you on this, because this is interesting, because I feel like it has to do with road safety and all that kind of thing. Does the Agency of Transportation, are they involved with any expenses related to roads around schools? In other words, those kinds of, you pull into the drive, are they involved financially with any kind of school bus kind of, would this be the first time that the Agency of Transportation would be asked to use some of those funds? It very well could be.
Just because of my working memory, we do provide funding for student transportation, and my working memory says I believe that that's education fund dollars, but I'm not 100% certain. I'm therefore really loath to confirm that. I might be able to try and research that and maybe raise my hand in a few minutes if you want to continue.
But we can talk to
I
someone
also
else as well.
may I don't want to put my new friend and colleague Joe March on the spot here, but perhaps he has some understanding of what the Agency of Transportation might fund in the area of driver education or other similar road safety initiatives.
Unfortunately, I don't have a working knowledge of the budgets for either of those agencies, so my input probably would not be that useful, I'll be quite honest.
And I don't want to keep the committee here debating, AOT, Ed, we can figure that out kind of with Senator Mazza and others. Do you have any other comments related to 4.1? Section 7.
Yes, related to section C of section, related to subsection C of section 7, those are my comments. Reading the additional language in 4.1 in terms of the model program, it appears in this draft, the committee is just putting additional specifications on this. And I just want to flag that we have not had time to review this with our DMV colleagues or fully review with our internal subject matter experts. There are two potential problems with some of the additional language you've added. One is that it appears to imply in A sub 1. No, excuse me, that's not correct. I apologize. It says in A1, in partnership with interested school districts, shall establish a model regional driver ed clinic program to provide the required minimum 6 hours behind the wheel. And then A sub 2 starts talking about regional level and partnering with interested school districts to define regions. And there seems to be an implication that we're gonna create a model program that will work statewide. And that the intent of our original suggestion was that we would work to identify a pilot program in one region of the state, working with districts that were voluntarily interested in doing so. And so our funding estimate is predicated on that. We probably would not be able to do this statewide with $200,000. I'm not 100% certain of that just because of the shortage of time. The other potential concern is the implementation deadline. My guess is we would probably be able to start doing this before July 15th of 2024. We're talking more than a year out because of that deadline. My guess is we probably do that before, but that's not informed by expert feedback at this point. So where we sit in understanding that the committee must and would like to move forward is that if the committee wants to move this language as we analyze this, we would just like to flag that we might have additional technical edits that may be needed or concerns, and we'll work with you and your colleagues in the House if you're open to that.
We're not moving it today, sometime next week, but I'd like this to come back after town meeting week. I mean, we've had this draft, it's not new, it was done 3 days ago. So if we could get some kind of.
I think it's absolutely reasonable for us to provide you any markups or suggested edits for this by next week.
Monday would be amazing, just so that I can then give folks a call and sort of see where everybody is. Senator Williams.
Somewhere on the screen.
Oh, thank you. Ms. Brody? Barbara, hi. Barbara, you're muted.
You hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. I wanted to go back and answer your question about Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
The legislature annually decides how much money would go to schools for driver education that is taken out of transportation and given to AOE. So presently, each school sends AOE, each public school sends AOE a list of students that have passed, failed, or incomplete. And they reimburse the schools, and it's been this way for like 35 years. They haven't increased, which is unfortunate because costs have increased, at $76 a student. So I would be teaching at a school, I'll send an enrollment to AOE who's in, with all the permit numbers, and then at the end of the semester, I will send the same students, and they will either say by their name, pass, failed, or incomplete. And then the school district would get a reimbursement money at $76 a student, not for the incompletes, but for the pass or failed. Unfortunately, that's where the problem became, because costs went up, teachers' costs went up, car costs went up, but the reimbursements did, and that's when schools started to cut teachers from the program and only allow, like Essex had just one teacher for a few years for 300 kids a year, of which one person can see, if they're lucky, 40 kids. So 120 never got driver's ed their sophomore year, and then it went from, if you're a senior, you would get it, junior, and then sophomores never got it in most schools. But it is still $76 per pupil for a pass or a fail. Now, the other thing, as he was talking about the regional driver's ed, we would like the association to be part of working, if this is what they want to do, to work on helping them with however they're going to provide driver's ed on a regional level. So we would like to be part of working on that with them. Is Joe there?
Joe is here. Yes, Joe is here.
Yeah, and Joe can talk about that a little bit, because we met yesterday to discuss it, and we would be willing to help AOE make this happen if this is the way we're going. It doesn't address teacher shortage, though. It may address, so how can we get more kids in driver's ed, but it's not going to address, do we have teachers to teach them? And that's still an issue we need to work with.
Sure. So what I'm going to ask, if the agency and our driver's ed friends are willing, for you all to have a conversation and bring us back some language sometime Monday, late afternoon, something like that. Barbara, would that work for you to have a conversation with the agency maybe on Monday or later today? Joe, you too, and see if we can just tidy this up and get to a good spot on it? Yes.
Yeah, have physical fit, which is why I'm not down here. As soon as we're done, I have PE, I have physical therapy to do. So I'd have to do it after, and it's probably too late for people. After 4 o'clock, and I don't know if that's too late. On Monday, I could do it anytime in the morning.
Great. I bet you guys can work something out.
For the record, Ted Fisher. Yes, I'm just going to say I don't think Senator will be able to honor our Monday deadline.
Monday, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Due also to the fact that town meeting day is a holiday.
Yeah.
So I will
maybe midweek.
I might be able to get you an estimate by the end of the day. The beauty of our digital world is I'm speaking to our driver's ed specialist who's watching on YouTube right now. But I'll talk to her and talk to our friends and colleagues in the field, and I'll also talk to the agency of transportation and try and get you a flight path or flight plan.
Right. So okay. Committee, is that okay? Does people feel comfortable letting folks work outside the building and coming back with some language for us to approve by the time the bill leaves us sometime after town meeting week? Everybody okay with that? Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Fisher. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Barbara. Ms. Simmons is going to be with us in about 5 minutes, so why don't we just take a quick bathroom break and do what Ms. Laney said, then pre-K, and then we'll adjourn. Oh, and vote.